Good morning, everyone. My name is Debbie Shields. I'm the designated broker owner of Shields Regal Realty, and welcome to this morning's class, Fair Housing and Advertising. Fair Housing and Advertising. Interesting, right? On your desk, I've actually passed out a little sticky note that looks like this. Would you be kind enough to put your name on it? And I want to ask you a very important question. This class is a fair housing class, right? I want to know if you ever in your life have ever felt that you personally got discriminated against. And if you did, I want you to write your name and just one word about that. Just one word. And I'm going to give you a minute because this is a very interesting class. If you don't feel that you've ever been discriminated against, it's kind of interesting because this class will make you feel like it, because we're going to talk about all the protected classes. The protected classes from the federal, this is federal law. Federal law started back in 1866. 1866, the law stated that individuals were protected with race, color, and religion in 1866. This is after Abe Lincoln talked about freeing the slaves. Remember all this history back in our history books? We're never back there, but we're going to talk about this today. We're going to talk a lot about it. So the truth of the matter is how many of you think that you actually were discriminated against? Let me see a show of hands. Okay. All right, so let me take your little note sticky you have. Oh, you've got a couple of them. Okay, if you can pass them forward to the edge of the aisle. How about over here? No one over here? Over here? And I'm going to put them up here because we're going to talk about these situations. Who else over here? Oh, we got another one over here. All right, thank you. All right, and on this side of the room, can you pass yours forward to the end of the row? Okay, we're good on that? So, okay, good. We're going to put it up here. All right, there we go. In 1866, civil rights laws in the United States were quite different than they are today. There was no discrimination based on race, color, and religion. Remember this when you took your classes? You remember these, don't you? Today, what is it? Today, it is no discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, and disability. But I want you to pick up your pens because you need to add two more that you and I ascribe to. These extra ones are sexual orientation. Write that down. That came into our Code of Ethics in 2012. And write down sexual identity. That came into place in 2014. So we have sexual orientation and sexual identity, 2012 and 2014. Interesting. They're not federal fair housing laws yet. How many of you think that it's just a matter of time before they get added into the federal fair housing laws? If you think that they might, please make a note on your little sticky, a yes or a no. And everyone should have one. If you need another sticky note, I'm going to pass them back around again. So who needs another sticky note? A couple of you, right? Okay. I'm just going to give you a little stack like that. The interesting thing about federal law in Arizona, we have our own, believe it or not, we have our own fair housing laws in the state of Arizona, don't we? Does a federal law have all the discrimination classes as well as the state laws throughout all the different states throughout the country? Arizona does, and because we're one of the newer states in the country, Arizona pretty much parallels federal fair housing laws, almost side by side. Write down Southwest Fair Housing. Southwest Fair Housing in Phoenix, Arizona is your state fair housing and HUD division that you would go to file a complaint, okay? So when we file a complaint, can you file a complaint for yourself and also for someone else, maybe someone in your family? Can you file a complaint for anyone but yourself? Amy says yes, thank you, Amy, and she's right. Yes, you can. You absolutely can. So today, you and I are taxed at a higher level than even the federal fair housing laws, because no discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, disability, and now we have sexual orientation and sexual identity. So who of you wrote yes on your little sticky note? Put your hands up, please. May I have your sticky note? Yes. And also, oh, great. So, Gina, when do you think that this may actually become federal law instead of only in the Realtor Code of Ethics?
Maybe 2020.
Maybe next year. Why do you say that? I bet you have a good reason for this.
Maybe a new administration.
Okay, Gina says maybe 2020 because of the new administration. And Gina, thank you for that answer, because I want you to think about what's going on in our country right now. In May, the National Association of Realtors, all of the actual leadership went into Congress and met with their congressmen and said, we are boots in the ground across this country. We're 1.4 million of us across the country. 1.4 million is a big number. We're the largest trade association in the United States. And you see how the public lives on a daily basis. You are in the neighborhoods. You are talking to the public. A lot of individual industries never even meet the public. Think about Amazon. You're just another number, right? But Gina, I like that answer. I actually think that that's validated by possibly a new administration. So thank you. That's a great answer. John, you said you think so as well. You think that?
Well, if you look at the history of these things, the list has been growing in terms of protected classes for a long time. I don't think this is going to be any different. I think it'll be just a matter of time. I don't think it'll be next year. I think it'll take several years before it is.
Okay, John, thank you for that answer. John, just to let you know what he just spoke, he said he doesn't think it will be maybe next year. You're thinking it's a little soon, but you see, and he thinks that in over time that he does believe it will be, because this is the way the country is changing. Things are taking a lot of turns and twists throughout everything that we're doing, right? Especially in our economy as well. So things do change. I love that you're thinking forward. I love that you're both thinking about our future, because we're part of that, and we are involved with the actual communities to the point where we know what they're doing, what they're saying, how people are responding. Very important. So no discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, disability, and it could be in the future federal law, but right now it's for you and I in our code of ethics. The sexual orientation and sexual identity is added to our mixed. So in 1866 though, not all of those were protected classes. In fact, 1866, race, color, and religion were the three protected classes. Of those three, which one was the most violated? Which one? Anybody have any idea? Race, color, religion, which one?
Race.
Both John and Lucy say race, and you are right. You're absolutely right. In our outline today, we are going to look at, and I'm going to take you from 1866, where equality was what it was all about. Remember the words separate but equal? Remember those words? Remember that? You remember, don't you? Separate but equal was very interesting in our country, and way before our time, class, way before any of our time. But we studied about it. This is American history, right? Way before our time, we had separate but equal. So I really would like to take you back in time, kind of like Back to the Future a little bit, but I want to take you back in time because I want you to think about what it might have been like for your grandparents and your great-grandparents. I'm going to take you about 50 years back, okay? So separate but equal was, and we all know who Rosa Parks was. Remember Rosa Parks? African-American. And she got on a bus, and there was a section for individual white people, and then there was a section for the black people. Do you remember this story from your history book? And she sat on it in one of the seats and she said, I'm not moving, I'm not giving up my seat to anyone. And the one person that wanted it was an individual white male. She was actually taken off the bus. It created a riot and began the bus strike and the boycott on the buses. Separate but equal. They would have separate train cars, one for the blacks, one for the whites. What about schools? Think about this. What about schools? Did they have separate schools for the blacks and then for the whites? Yes. Back a few years ago, about 1954, way before your time, Daniel, right? Yeah, there was a schoolhouse here and all these communities, and there was houses all over here. And then another schoolhouse over here on this side. But here's the thing, and Lucy, you might remember some of this because does anybody know what a railroad switching yard is? It's where the railroad cars come through the town, and then it's about like a big parking lot for the railroad cars, right? Can you picture that? Okay. Mr. Brown lived over here, and this was where the white schoolhouse was. Separate but equal, separate but equal. Here's the black schoolhouse. Mr. Brown said, I don't want Susie to walk across the tracks in the morning to the black school, and then after school walk back across, there's no buses back then, and walk back across to come home. How many of you in here are parents? How many of you are parents? Would you agree with him as far as the safety of the child? I would too, right, Anita? Thank you. Absolutely. So he said, I'm going to go into the white school because I live right here. So he walks in the door and he goes up to the reception and he says, I want to register my little girl. And they said, I'm sorry, Mr. Brown, you can't register her here. You have to go to the black school. Yeah, but I live right here close by, just a few streets, and I don't want her to walk across that railroad switching yard twice a day just to go to school. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about it. So Mr. Brown and actually 13 other parents actually filed a lawsuit. The name of the lawsuit is Brown versus, does anybody know? Board of Education. And that was in Topeka, Kansas, right? Topeka, Kansas. It goes into the court, it goes from the lower courts all the way up. It's all the way up to the top court, Supreme Court. And now a judge passes away, which delays the decision, but it keeps winning and building steam as it goes upward. Finally, they have to do some due diligence. They have to determine, are the two schools separate? Yes, they are. But are they equal? That question is, are they equal, right? So they look at the white school and they look at the teachers. Are the teachers better in the white school than in the black school? Well, they determine the teachers over here were better in the white school. Are the books, the material, the educational material, better in the white school, and I'm just going to put educational material here, versus the books and material over here? What do you think they determined? Yeah, better in the white school. What about the facility itself, the actual schoolhouse versus the white school versus the black schoolhouse, the actual facility itself? What condition were they in? Was the white school in a better condition over here than the black school over here? And they determined on every level, pretty much, the white school was superior. The outcome with Board versus Education created this amazing, because it desegregated schools. The win was that no longer, and this is 1954, class, 1954, no longer did the children have to be separated or segregated. They now could go to any school. Was that a great big win? Yeah, but if you think about it, was society ready for that yet? When we talked about sexual orientation and sexual identity, is society ready for that yet? Because that's kind of the new thing on the block right now, isn't it? But back in the day, all of a sudden, that decision was overruled, and now we have desegregation. We have schools where children can go. Doesn't matter what race, color, religion, sex, national origin, doesn't matter. But was that a trying time for America? What do you think?
Yes.
Anita says yes, and I agree with her. In reading and studying about this, when Susie went to school, she had to be escorted by the military police. They had MP on their bands. And as she walked up the stairs, and there's pictures of this, I mean, you can see pictures and videos of this, she was being spat at, and things were being thrown at her, and name calling. It was pretty crazy, actually. Pretty crazy. Did riots start? Did riots start now? The upheaval began. The upheaval began, and because people were used to one way, and that way was the only way. Remember back kind of in some of that, they just were so narrow-minded because they didn't have the education that you all have today even. So Brown versus Board of Education starts rioting and problems throughout the country. But it doesn't stop there. I want you to think about where you were. We're in the month of November right now, aren't we? Yeah? I want you to think about November 22nd. Is today November 22nd?
21st.
Today's the 21st? Where were you November 22nd, 1963, a few years after this? Not all of you were born yet. Daniel wasn't born yet, were you? No, but that's okay. You know from your history books, though, don't you? What happened on that day
Kennedy assassinated.
in history? Gina?
Kennedy was assassinated.
Gina says President Kennedy was assassinated. Do you remember where you were, Gina? Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for remembering that. First of all, where were you when you heard that news?
I was sitting in my living room. I was 3 years old or 4 years old, and I was trying to figure out why my mother was crying.
Gina said she was 3 or 4 years old. She was trying to figure out why her mother was crying. She remembers her mother crying. Did that impact her mother, but also did it impact the 3, 4-year-old? Mm-hmm. It impacted you, didn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Someone else over here said they remember. Was it you, John?
I was in 3rd grade. We had an in-service day, so we were home that day. So we all watched it on television and watched it unfold. My mother was crying.
Okay, John said,
My siblings were there, and we all watched it on TV.
wow, that very powerful. Thank you, John, for sharing that. John remembers he was at home because they had an in-service day, and he and his siblings were at home, and you watched it on television that day. Interesting. Rusty, do you remember where you were?
I remember very well. I was early married, and I was working at Moon Valley Country Club, and I went down to the post office to pick up the mail. And on the way, I had the radio on, and Kennedy was shot.
Oh, wow. Thank you, Rusty. Rusty was newlywed, basically, is what you were saying. And he was working at Moon Valley Country Club, went down to the post office, is that right? And heard it on the radio. Anybody over here remember where you were November 22nd, 1963? Dennis.
I was marching to class at the Naval Academy. I was a sophomore. And the campus, the yard we called it, was very, very sad when the news came out.
Wow, Dennis, thank you, Dennis. He was marching at the Naval Academy as a sophomore, and this is when you heard it, when you were marching, very sad. And Anita, you had your hand up, I believe.
Yeah, well, I was in 2nd grade, and I remember Mrs. Mollering, never forgot her name, came into class crying. Just could not continue with class.
Cannot continue. Anita, thank you, Anita. Anita said that she was in 2nd grade and her teacher, Miss Moling, came into the class crying and she couldn't continue the class. And see how it affects even the children. I mean, we're adults, right? But the children, and Gina, you, how it affected you when you were little, how you were young. But did you ever forget that? You never forgot that, did you, class? You just don't forget things like that. Now, what happens in America? We have who takes the presidency? Who becomes our president overnight? Lyndon B. Johnson, right? So now rioting created throughout the country, from East Coast to West Coast, because now that president that was young and just almost regal at the time, one of the youngest presidents ever, right? And now overnight is gone. Lyndon B. Johnson steps in. This is 1963. August 28th, 1963. Washington, D.C. I have a dream that someday my 4 little children will be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Who am I talking about? Martin Luther King. Thank you, Gina. Martin Luther King. Was that a powerful speech in Washington, D.C.? Was that powerful? Was he talking about freedom? Let it ring, freedom? Yeah. 1964, April the 4th. Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King is invited to go and be in a parade with sanitation workers. He goes to Memphis, Tennessee. He steps out on his porch. And when he steps out on the porch of his balcony in the hotel, he gets shot. And before they get him to the hospital, we lose him. Now, we want to talk about rioting? Fires, picketing, rioting, upheaval everywhere. Lyndon B. Johnson has to do something about it, and he has to do something about it really quickly, right? So we're moving on in history. It's 1968 when this happens. 1968, April the 4th. On April the 11th, make a note of that, April the 11th, a week after his death, and this was 1968 that this incident happened. He was in Washington, D.C. in 1963 and 64 and talking about all the freedoms and working and living together in one country that's not going to be divided. And now, 1968, April 4th, he passes away. Lyndon B. Johnson writes into law, April the 11th, 1968, the 1968 Federal Fair Housing Laws. That's when the reality in America really began to grow. It's now growing because we have to do something about it. He had no choice. Everyone was basically hurting each other and property as well. 1968. How many of you remember television 1968? Do you remember some of that? Yeah. Remember some of the commercials? One of the commercials I remember, and I was quite young, but I remember this commercial, and it was, "You've come a long way, baby." And it was a song Nancy Sinatra was singing, and she had those white go-go boots on, right? And she would sing, "You've got a long way, baby, to get to where you are today." What was she talking about? And these boots are made for walking. They're going to walk all over you. What was her position? What was she talking about? She was talking about women's rights. We're talking 1972 and 3 and 4. Right down 1974, sex became part of our protected classes. That was in 1974. How many of you remember those commercials? They don't even have those commercials anymore, do they? Right down 1988, because in 1988 is when familial status was added to our protected classes. Now, I'm from a huge family, really big family, and I'm the oldest daughter. And I remember traveling on vacation, and I remember how people would look at us because we're just so many of us, right? And I would think like, wow, what are they looking at? It was because we had so many. little ones, right? On vacation. Familial status was not a protected class until 1988. But more importantly, today, when we think about familial status, we're thinking about what? Any individual under what age? Under the age of 18. As soon as you hit 18, what did you just become? What did you become?
Adult.
An adult. We're an adult now, right? So there's different laws for adults, but familial status is a human being under the age of 18 years of age. Under the age of 18 years. Now, under the age of 18, is a fetus also a protected class today? Say yes. Yes. It's under the age, it's alive, right? So an unborn child is a protected class. What about children that are up for adoption? Are they protected? First of all, ask yourself, are they under the age of 18? Is that like the first going question? Yes, they're going to be protected. Does familia mean you have to have the mother and father live under the same roof? Not at all. Familia just means under the age of 18. Under the age of 18. Write down 1988, disability. Write that down. Wow, disability. You know what today, class? If you're thinking about all the various protected classes, race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, and disability, of all of those, which one do you think is today the biggest problem, the biggest violator, the one that people are getting wrong? Which one is it today, do you think? Anybody want to guess?
Disability.
Ah, thank you, Chris. Disability. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Disability. And guess what? Disability is like this. Listen to this, class.
I'm not disabled.
I talk about, no, you're not. You know what's so interesting? There's a class that is an amazing class that I teach on service animals and companion animals. Did you know that? Today, we can't see the disabilities. A lot of times, it's a disability that could be mental, it could be congestive heart failure, something you don't see. And you have to have an animal with you to help you keep calm. Interesting. I was on the way to Utah for leadership, and here's what happened. I'm at the airport, Sky Harbor, and I look up, and from here to the back of the room is a woman walking as fast as she can, and with her on the leash is a little tiny Chihuahua. It's a little tiny dog about this big, right? And it's got a sweater on, but the front of the sweater was on, but the back was off. So every time the dog walked, it would go like this with the sweater, the yellow sweater, right? And I get up there, and she's going to the same gate I'm going to. And I walk up to her and I say, wow, that little puppy had to really walk hard to keep up with you. And she said to me, she goes, this is my assistive animal. And I'm not going to question her, but I want you to think about this. You're in housing, and we have some certain things that we have to ask when we have a situation like this. But anyway, she says, the name of the dog was Lacey. I take Lacey everywhere with me. Everywhere with me, she keeps me calm because I'm afraid of traveling, and my anxiety, she keeps my anxiety down. Well, here's the story. She gets on the same flight as me. Wow. And I'm like going, that's interesting. And just as we were getting on, I saw a couple people come up and talk to her, and then off they went. And then we get to the other end in Salt Lake City, and now we're at the carousels. And she comes up beside me and she says, which carousel are we on? And I look up and I tell her. And she goes, okay, thank you. And she goes over and she's trying to find her luggage, right? And then here comes my luggage, and I pick my luggage up and I set it down. And the second I set it down right here, this person, this big man, tower of a man, says, thank you for taking care of Lindsay. And I thought, oh, it must be her father. I said, oh, you're welcome, right? And then there's a man on this side of me, and he says, we really appreciate that. Wow, interesting, right? Because in the airport, after I said hello to her, and then she tells me this, we sat down for a second together, and one thing I didn't tell you is she asked me to watch this little case here while she went to charge her phone. And I'm like going, what? I go, oh, wait, oh yeah, sure. I'm not going, I'm not supposed to watch the case, right, Amy? You're not supposed to take care of somebody else's luggage in the airport. But I didn't have any bad gut feeling. So I needed to tell you that. Well, anyway, the thing that was in the case, can you imagine what it was? I'm sorry?
I have no idea, Mom.
Lacey.
Lacey.
No, it was a violin. Her name was Lindsay Sterling. She just hired, Lindsay was just hired by Disney. She does the violin and dancing all at the same time. I had no idea who the person was. No idea. So these two gentlemen on either side of me offered me to come to her concert tonight at the Mormon temple. And they said there's 3,500 individuals, and we'd love for you to come. And I'm like really taken back by this, but I'm there for leadership, and I just said, I'm so sorry. I'm already, with plans this evening. I had no idea who she was. She, if you look at her, can you tell there's anything wrong with Lindsay Sterling? Can you? No, but she has anxiety. And she has eating disorders on top of it. And the anxiety with the traveling, with everything that she does. You and I are not qualified to disclose and also try to determine what someone's disability may be. Hands off, right? Guess what? Today, this is important that you know this. Today, an animal that's a companion animal or an assistive animal does not need to be trained. Is this important to know? Is it important to know? 2014 class, this came into place under HUD. This is your update of HUD on the Fair Housing and Disability. So today, you do not have to have that animal certified or trained. There's no training, no certificates that are necessary. Listen to this. It can be any animal. Any animal? Any animal that can service that person. For Lindsay Sterling, the little dog on the lap kept her calm, kept her heart rate down, kept her anxiety lowered. Any animal, and look at this, any size. Do you need to know that moving forward in real estate? Yeah, no certificate. A service animal is a service animal by definition. It's usually a dog or a miniature horse. A service animal falls under ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. This is the HUD ruling, and this is 2014 update for you. That has changed a lot, hasn't it? Has changed dramatically. So when you think about that story I just told you about Lindsay Sterling, because truthfully, that's where we are, class. We're right here today. I know not everyone will agree with some of that, but here's the problem. It's not up to us to agree or disagree, is it? It's not up to us. So let's go on with exemptions for fair housing. So this is one of the exemptions that you had that's the newest one that I wanted to talk to you about. Owner's rights. Now, let me ask you something. If you want to sell your property, can you discriminate on who the buyer is? If you right now, holding a real estate license, can you discriminate? What do you think? No. Thank you. I think it was Larry said no and Anita said no. Thank you both. The truth is you got your real estate license, and once you pledged that you were going to abide by all the laws, federal fair housing laws included, you gave up the right to discriminate. Did you know that? Now, if you do not hold a real estate license, can you discriminate? Are there exemptions for sale by owner that has not asked you to represent them in any shape or way, / to sell or to lease, or a property manager? Once the individual in the public doesn't have a license, they could discriminate. Even though they shouldn't, they could. But once they hire you, your licensing laws already say hands off, you can't discriminate, right? So the exemption would be a for sale by owner, correct? But any one of us in here, even if we owned our own properties and we wanted to sell them, we now know the laws and we cannot discriminate. So that's where our hands get tied. So what is reasonable? It says, and when an owner obtains representation with a licensed individual. Anybody that's licensed, then you as a licensee have to disclose the fact that because I'm licensed, I cannot discriminate against. This is part of my laws, my real estate laws, and federal laws. So what if that seller says to you, I don't want to sell my property to, let's just say, purple people? What's that conversation like? What do you say next? What do you say? Anita?
You can't discriminate, but I've walked away from listings because of that.
Oh, thank you. So Anita says, you can discriminate, but I am walking away because I cannot discriminate based on any of the protected classes. You either have to identify where the situation is. If they are wanting and they're really adamant about not selling or showing their house or leasing their property to a certain race or religion, any of the protected classes at all, it's up to you and I to educate the public, isn't it? And the best thing to do, and I love that Anita did this, she walked away. She walked away because why? Why would you walk away?
There's certain things you can't compromise on. I mean, it's just, you just don't do it. My husband thought I lost my mind. At the time, it was $500,000, and he's like, why would you do that?
All right. So Anita says, I walked away because I don't want to compromise my license. And I'm with her on that. Here's the problem. Remember earlier I said to you, can you file a federal fair housing lawsuit yourself, or can you file it on behalf of someone else? If you know anyone that has been discriminated against, think about the individual children that can't even read or write yet. Could they be discriminated against? And could you be the parent filing that fair housing violation? Yes, so you could potentially be that individual. So I think walking away, what Anita did, is a beautiful thing to do, because if you explain it to them and they don't really get it, could they pull you right into a fair housing lawsuit? Yeah, or a complaint. Here's the problem you and I have. As licensees, if we have a fair housing violation against us, we all of a sudden became unemployable. Not just in the real estate world, but we would be a risk to any other business out there. So here we are thinking about all this, thinking, wow, I need to either really super educate them, but if they're gonna have a tendency to pull the other direction, I love what Anita said. She just walked away, thank you, but I can't help you. I love that. I love that. Better safe than sorry. Better safe than sorry, right? Comment? Yeah, you said, I'm happy with that. Private and religious groups, can they discriminate? Larry, you shaking your head, yes. Can you give me an example of a private or religious group that can discriminate?
But they're only going to deal with people of their own religion.
Okay, so they've set up their facility for just that specific religion, right? Okay, so, and how about private clubs? What's an example of a private club that can discriminate? Can a country?
Masters Golf.
I'm sorry?
The Masters Golf Club, they discriminated against women.
Masters Golf Club.
In Augusta.
And Augusta. Okay, that's a new one, and I hadn't thought about that one before, Rusty, but thank you. Thank you. What about dormitories? How about ASU, men and women's dormitories? Can they have separate living quarters for them? And dormitories are actually excluded because of to be protective of both of the sexes there. So interesting if we think about that. How about country clubs? Can they discriminate on, and they're discriminating most of the time on money/financial stability, correct? They want to make sure if all these members that come here can afford to be a member here. Sort of those types of things. So we do have a few exemptions. One of the exemptions that's not up here is, and it's kind of interesting because we have it today. Do you remember back in Chicago, Illinois, the Mrs. Murphy, when she lost her husband and became a widow? She went right she's kept going, but what she did to survive is she rented out her rooms. What do we do today? What do we have today that's called a Mrs. Murphy, if you think about it? Mrs. Murphy ruling. Airbnb, VRBO, right? Right? That's today's Mrs. Murphy's. Isn't that interesting to think about? We think we've come so far, but we still have it today. It's just called something different. How many of you have ever seen the movie Forrest Gump? Yes. Everybody seen Forrest Gump? Okay. So Sally Fields is the star outside of who's the major star? Who's Forrest? Tom Hanks, right? Tom Hanks. He's the son, but she has to support him. And what does she do? But she brings in those individuals. She brought in Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley taught Tom Hanks how to rock and roll. Remember that area of the movie? Was she a Mrs. Murphy's slash at the time? Yeah. These are exemptions. Why are they exemptions? Because she is living underneath that same roof and that same domicile as she's renting out the rooms. So Airbnb, if you resided underneath that same roof, you would still be a Mrs. Murphy's law. You'd be an exemption there as well. But you have to reside in the same roof, under the same roof. Sometimes you have Airbnb where you rent out the whole entire house, but you don't stay there. That would not be a Mrs. Murphy exemption, right? So there's a few exemptions, but those are pretty much the only ones that we have. So looking at limitations and exemptions and also practical problems in advertising today. So where do we advertise today, class? Where do we advertise? Do we advertise over here on the MLS? Do we advertise on a computer? Back in the day when you got your license, Carl, when you got your license 40 years ago, we didn't have the internet. Daniel, can you imagine? We didn't have the internet.
Wasn't there when I was born.
I'm sorry?
The internet wasn't around when I was born.
The internet wasn't even around when he was born. Wasn't around when I was born either. The internet wasn't around. But what we did, may I borrow this?
Yeah.
What we did is we advertised in print form. The word print means to publish, right? Print form. The law book, print form, right? Wait a minute. The internet, when I hit enter, when I advertise, did I just print? Say yes. Yes, because this is fair housing and advertising. Whenever I advertise, it doesn't matter what format I'm using, does it? It is always going to be part of the fair housing laws. I cannot discriminate now when I advertise. If I'm doing Airbnb, I can't discriminate on race, color, religion, sex, national origin, familial status, disability in any format whatsoever. But today we are advertising almost, it's in the 90s, right there on that computer, right here on your cell phone, in your iPads. We're using different tools, but we are still printing. When we hit the enter button on the internet, where does that advertisement go to? Where's it go? Global. It goes everywhere out there, doesn't it? Everywhere. So now you can't pull it back in. But whose eyes have to look at every single advertisement before we hit that enter button / or go to press? Whose eyes? Who said broker? Was it you, Doug? Thank you, Doug. Doug says broker, and he's absolutely right. In Arizona, the broker's eyes have to look at, and this is the broker's eyes here, have to look at every single advertisement, no matter if it's a written advertisement or if you create it over here on the internet. If you create it on the internet, you may have to do a screenshot, maybe email it to your broker, but you have to make sure the broker looks at it. Are you all doing this? Don't answer that. Because I know sometimes we forget because it happens so fast. We finish it, we're like going, oh great, it's done, hit enter, and then we forget that we didn't give it to the broker. Now, here's the next question for you regarding advertising. We all know that we're advertising over here. How many of you advertise exclusively online? Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter? How many of you? MLS? Okay, interesting, right? Most of what we are doing is online. Why? Why are we advertising online? A lot of times because it's free, right? We can boost that ad. In the Facebook, they charge you like $10, $30, $50. LinkedIn, Twitter, all of that, Google. You can do so many advertisements and you can boost the posts, but they can also be free. Why are we advertising online?
That's where the people are.
I think
Exposure.
the exposure, Dennis says, thank you. The exposure is so important. You know why the exposure is important? That's where your buyers are. Hello, did you know that, what would you, if you were gonna guess, the public, they're online now reading about you. They're actually searching you. They're searching for your properties now, right? 6 months before they ever call you. You have to be online today. When we talk about advertising and fair housing advertising, we're talking about advertising that and making sure and certain that we are not discriminating based on any of the protected classes. So when we advertise, can we say, oh, it's close to the Mormon Tabernacle or close to the Catholic Church? Can we say that? Larry says no. Larry, why?
Because it's, you're essentially telling them that, you're looking for Mormons or you're looking for Catholics.
So thank you. Larry says because you'd be driving them possibly either to become Mormon or Catholic or away from. So here's the thing. To advocate for or to discriminate against is both a problem, isn't it? So we don't use any advertisement. And I see a lot of times in the MLS location, like the directions, they'll say drive down Hayden Road, go past to Our Lady of Perpetual Health and turn left at the next street. Is that a fair housing violation? Is it? Yes, definitely. Because we may be trying to advocate that it's close by, or we could, does the public have a different opinion when they read your ads? Could the public feel different about the way that you are advertising? Could they? Yeah, they may say, oh, they're trying to get me to join, or they're trying to keep me away from it. So anyone out there, when we talk about hitting this button, this enter button, that means it just printed. That means it went globally to the whole world. Today, it goes to the world. Back in the day, it would be the Scottsdale Progress, right? Or probably right now, here, maybe the Republican Gazette. It used to be just the little geographical area that you were advertising in. Not today, and no longer, right? The problem we have with advertising today is if we don't have a broker's eyes look at it, could we create a violation that is very innocent, like just giving directions? Well, I just was giving directions. I didn't mean to do anything bad, but could somebody in the public read that as, oh, you discriminated against me or my religion? Could they do that? That's why this class is so crazy in emotion, because if you don't think you ever had a discrimination against you, maybe you didn't really listen to what the other person said in the ad or possibly to you, because I bet you every one of you have. Up here we have David said no, he's not been discriminated against. L.L. Young, was that Lucy? Oh, Larry. Yes, and it says professional school admissions.
Yeah, during a period when they were really pushing affirmative action.
They were pushing
Affirmative action,
affirmative action.
right, so there was reverse discrimination.
Oh, reverse discrimination. Isn't that interesting? Interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that. Who else do we have up here? We have Dennis. Dennis, you say you don't think you've had any discrimination before
Correct.
in your whole life.
Right.
Okay. Have you seen someone else be discriminated against?
Yes.
Can you remember a situation?
Well, actually, it goes back to the Naval Academy. We had very few African Americans at the time. And they were discriminated against.
Okay, so Dennis shares that in the Naval Academy back in the day, we had very few African Americans, and they were discriminated on quite a bit. That's what you were saying, right? Okay, interesting, right? So you can see when someone else has been discriminated against, and now Anita says she had a conversation with the seller, and the seller didn't want to sell the property to whatever that class was that was protected, and she identified it. Do we need to identify when it's happening, where it's happening, and speak to it? Is that our job? It's all of our jobs. It's our job every day because we are out in the public. We're in the public, and we are the ones responsible for letting that seller or that buyer or that landlord and tenant situation, let them know that that is unacceptable. It's unacceptable, isn't it? And if we don't identify and stand up for that right of that person that's a protected class, who's going to? So when I ask each one of you, have you ever been discriminated against or seen someone else be discriminated against? I hear it a lot. I hear it a lot. Did you know Southwest Fair Housing in Arizona right here? Every one of you can go take a class from them. Did you know that? You don't have to have a license. Did you know that? As a licensee, you will get your 3 hours of credit. And what's super interesting about it is all the other individuals in the classroom come from all walks of life. All walks of life. A lot of individuals I just took one this summer, they were from an HOA. I think the whole HOA was there. And they were yelling at the individual that works for Southwest Fair Housing saying, oh, they're just telling me they want that pet, and they're just they're not calling it a pet, they're calling it an assistive animal. And they can't have that. And this one gentleman was loud. Can you say no pets? Are pets a protected class? Hello?
No.
No, you're absolutely right. Pets are not a protected class. Pet is an animal that is there just basically to be an animal. But an assistive or a comfort animal assists that human being with at least one disability, whether that's anxiety, whether that's heart condition, whether that's mental illness, it doesn't matter. A pet is not a protected class. Can you charge a pet deposit? Yes, you sure can. How about pet rent? Can you charge pet rent? Absolutely. Can you say no pets? Absolutely, because pets are not protected. So let's look at advertising today. Can you say in the internet, no pets all day long? All day long, you can say no pets. But where the change comes in is assistive animal or a comfort animal. A comfort animal is identified, and I've already given you the breakdown, it's all right here, but that animal has to assist the human being with one disability. It only needs one. Can you have more than one assistive animal?
Yes.
Can you have more than one disability? Oh, absolutely. Alzheimer's, people forgetfulness, dementia. You think about this, autism. There are many disabilities that you and I don't see and we cannot judge. We can ask one question. I want you to write this down. What service does the animal provide? And then zip, write that down. That you can ask without discriminating against. Once you've advertised out there, no pets, and someone shows up at your door or shows up at your office and they say, oh, you know, I do have an assistive animal, a comfort animal. That's different than a pet. A pet, if they say it's a pet, then a pet you can discriminate against. Larry?
Got two questions. One is, all pets are comfort animals because we already know that having a pet. and
I can't-
with it-
all
are
pets-
comfort animals because we know that having a pet and a relationship with a pet decreases blood pressure and heart rate.
Okay.
Increases one's longevity. Okay, so
Okay, number one, Larry says that most all pets can be determined to be assistive or comfort because pets can help you keep your heart rate down. Not all pets. My little Pomeranian barks all the time and I'm always like anxious. No, hush, be quiet. So he creates stress for me sometimes. So
But when you're sitting with them and you're petting them, your heart rate goes down.
That's
your
it.
blood pressure goes down. The other thing is, as a property owner, even though I can't charge a deposit or keep somebody from having a comfort animal or a service animal, can I have a damage deposit or charge the owner damages for anything that
Okay.
animal causes?
All right, so Larry's question was, and thank you for the question. The second question was, can I charge for the damage that animal does? Can you charge a pet deposit over here? The answer is yes. Over here, you cannot charge a deposit. 0 on the deposit over here because this animal here is helping with a disability. It's much like having a wheelchair. It's protected. But can I charge a separate deposit was the question, and the answer is no. The only thing you can do is charge the security deposit up to 1.5 times the rent. If they damage above that amount, then you have to take them to small claims court and go through that process. You cannot, did you hear what I said? Not ever charge deposit for an assistive or a comfort animal. 0. Now, one other question, because this is new in 2014 for you, and these are some of the updates here. The other question is, now let's say I'm going to go pick up the assistive animal and take it to the groomer. I take it from the individual that it's actually helping service, and I take it to the groomer. When it's with me, is it protected? No. No, it's not with me. It has to be with the owner to be protected, or it has to be with the trainer. Have you ever gone to a store or anywhere in public and the animal's in training and it says in training? You're not supposed to go touch it because the animal's being trained to be in the public, around the public. It's being trained for seeing eye dog to be trained to take the person safely across the road. It's being trained to listen for certain things. So, but an animal that is a service animal or an assistive or emotional support or a comfort animal is not protected unless they're with the person they're servicing. It's interesting to think about, isn't it? Very interesting. But the one question you can ask as a licensee is, what service does the animal provide? The individual will have a doctor's letter. You can't say, what's wrong with you? I want to see what's wrong with you, or I want to see the paperwork that says what's wrong with you. You can't do that. You can only ask, what service does the animal do? What does it provide? Does that make sense?
Can you require a doctor to certify that this is required?
Okay, Rusty's question was a good question, thank you, is can you require a doctor's letter? The answer is if you're an assistive animal, you have to have a doctor's letter. That's what, it's not certified. It's from a caregiver that says this individual human being needs this animal for the comfort. And Larry brought up a really good point. He brought up when the animal, if it could be a chicken, it could be a rabbit, a cat, a dog, whatever, on your lap stroking that animal, the proven test in all research is that it reduces the heart rate. It calms the anxiety. And that's why Lindsey Sterling ended up being a perfect example to tell you, this little tiny, she had to be like only 5 feet tall, maybe 90 pounds, maybe 100 tops. Little tiny thing. Yeah, she looked great, right?
What about companion animal? They get around that by saying it's a companion. I don't have to have a certificate for that, right?
Okay, Doug, thank you. Because this is where, good question. Doug wants to know, can they get around it by saying companion? Write this down. Companion, emotional support, and assistive are all the same. Write that down. They can be called a comfort, they can be called an emotional support or an assistive. But,
They have to serve that person.
and they would serve that individual.
So if they don't serve that person, then it gets tricky, right?
That's why you ask, what service does the animal provide? And then you listen. You listen, class.
But they lie, and they say the service.
And here's the thing, and Doug says, and then they lie, right? They never lie to you, Doug, do they? Right?
What I'm facing is I'm a commercial property manager, so I've got a guy, a bodybuilder, he's got a gym, and he has his pit bull in there. And he keeps it there because he has some kids who are autistic and they like him. But the problem is the dog runs around the property. So
Can you make sure the dog still behaves itself? Yes.
I got quiet enjoyment clauses, so I can default the guy, but then I'm realizing maybe I can't default the guy, even though my lease says I can.
Okay, good. So Doug's explanation is a little bit more detailed now, so thank you. Here he's a property manager for a commercial building. It's a pit bull, and the dog is running around out of control, it sounds like. Can you give that individual a little notice saying you must control your animal? Can you do that? And the answer is yes, whether it's here or here. Either way, what's very interesting, even in a service animal and ADAs, Americans with Disability, the dog that will come into a restaurant is trained to go underneath the table, class. Not out here in the aisle, not so somebody could trip on them, but under the table and be controlled by either, if the individual is in a wheelchair and can't leash the animal, it has to be under voice control. So the animal still has to be able to be controlled. If the animal is unruly, can you ask that the animal be, Doug, this is really important, the animal be controlled? Or maybe if it's in a restaurant and they're barking, can you ask the animal to be removed from the restaurant? You can't ask the patron to be removed. That's going to be important. Very, very important to think about that. So I'm glad for this question, Doug, because this is a really good example of what you can and can't say right now. So you can ask for the animal to be removed or the animal to be controlled, but you can't ask the person to be removed or be controlled. Okay, any other comments or questions? Are we ready for a 10-minute break? Ready for a break? Are you learning anything new today? Yeah? Sure. Good, good, awesome. All right, well, thank you so much. Let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then we will come back at, it looks like about 26 after. All right, thank you.